I think one of the most significant things in that was said by Jesus in that last Passion Week was what he told Pilate. And I realized the Epiphany and Gethsemane is important, that not my will but thine be done, and I would rate that up there, but I think it's still even more important when he told Pilate, my kingdom is not of this world. Christians have taken centuries to figure that out and have not done very well, that his kingdom is not of this world. And so I want to look at of this world today. And one of my favorite episodes that almost all the Gospels point to, I'll look particularly at Mark 13 today, is when Jesus was in the temple and his own disciples took such pride in the temple. Look what beautiful stones, what a beautiful building. And it was their national, it wasn't just a matter of architectural design. This was their nationalism coming out. Like, aren't we the greatest people on earth? Look, we have one of the finest temples ever built. And it truly, this was possibly one of the most impressive temples outside Rome. Even the Romans respected it because Titus specifically commanded that it not be destroyed in 70 AD because of the respect they had for the temple. So they took just national pride in this. To which Jesus said, no big deal. This place is going to be destroyed, not a stone left on another, which blew them away. They were in the temple courtyard when he said it, in the Temple Mount area. Stunned in silence, and it takes about 45 minutes to walk from the Temple Mount to the Mount of Olives. And then his three closest apostles kind of saddle up to him and say, because I'm sure all the way over there, they're saying, no, you ask him, no, you ask him, no, you ask him. And when they get the nerve, they say, now, when is this going to happen? To which he responds, as he sat on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, just in case you didn't know your geography, because they're still looking at the temple protruding way above the walls of the city of Jerusalem. Peter, James, John, and Andrew ask him privately, tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign when all of these things are about to be accomplished? And Jesus began to say to them, see that no one leads you astray. Kind of hold that thought. Many will come in my name, saying, I am he, and they will lead many astray. And when you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. This must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will be famines. But these are but the beginnings of the birth pains. Be on your guard. For they will deliver you over to councils, and you will be beaten in synagogues, and you will stand before governors and kings for my sake, to bear witness before them. And the gospel must first be proclaimed to all nations. If I were Andrew, I'd say, why did we ask that question? So give us the good news. To me, this is evidence of the inspiration of God, because no one leading a movement would give that kind of bad news as a foundation for what's going to happen next. This is nothing but bad news. And it proved true. Within a few decades, Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans. Within a century, Jerusalem was destroyed again. Hadrian came in and built a temple to Zeus where Herod's temple was, and a temple to Aphrodite where what became the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, because it just an insult. And then the Byzantines come along, destroy Jerusalem again, and build up the Jerusalem that you have on the Madaba map by the 4th century. Then you get to the 8th century, and the Arabs come in and destroy Jerusalem and build their mosque. And then the 10th century, the Crusades come in and destroy Jerusalem and put a church. They only hold it 100 years, and the Arabs come back in and destroy it. But they didn't destroy the city this time like the Crusaders did. In fact, they didn't even massacre the people like the Crusaders did. Then you get to 16th century, the Turks come in and fight and take it over, and Actually, the top of all the walls of Jerusalem you see today were the reconstruction done by the Turks, Ottoman Empire, and they had it for 300 years. Into World War II, the British come in and take Jerusalem. They leave it to Jordan in 1948 when the state of Israel was established, and Israel got everything up to Jerusalem. And then in 1967, the last war at this point that's been in Jerusalem. We don't know when the next one is. I guess when we try to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem, take down the Dome of the Rock, that'll be the next major world war. 1967. We were living in Jerusalem at the time, so I want to talk about wars and rumors of wars, of what was going on during that time. Egypt militarizes Sinai in May of 1967. They start flooding into Sinai with their military and then decide to cut off the Gulf of Aqaba, which also it's a blockade to Israel's port of Eilat. And then the rumors start to fly. Nasser was grandstanding at the time, wanting to drive the Jews into the sea and all this kind of stuff. Even though he did not intend to go to war, he wanted to use that as leverage to get some kind of a deal that would make him look good, but that wasn't really what he wanted to do. But unfortunately, Amir, his general, had a different view. He was a hawk, and he really wanted to go to war. And in fact, he said, this time we will be the ones to start the war. England, the U.S., the UN all told Israel, don't strike. They don't mean it. They're just bluffing. Don't listen to what's being said in the airways. Israel wasn't sure of that. In fact, they were taking it, and I would understand why. You're kind of surrounded as you were. Syria's wanting to attack, and they're not sure about Lebanon, but they know Egypt now is certainly rattling their sabers. So they came up with a plan called Al-Fajr, which is the Arabic word for dawn. And they came up with the date of the dawn that they're going to attack Israel. Nasser's strategy was to bait Israel into attacking first. But his chief of staff, Fauzi, who was his trusted friend, kept saying, no, you don't want to even do that. He was advising him against everything, the buildup and all of that. But the chief of the Egyptian military intelligence in Sinai was also against the buildup because he knew that only 20% of their tanks, 25% of their artillery, and hardly 30% of their planes were fit for war. Not a good move. Nasser refused to listen. Set the blockade. May 23rd. The war starts June 5th, by the way. So May 23rd, LBJ, Lyndon Johnson, President of the United States, who's fighting his own issues with Vietnam, makes it very clear to Israel, do not strike. He called the blockade of Egypt that it was disastrous to the cause of peace. May 25th, the Sinai general of the Sinai informed his officers that Egypt was ready at full strength to attack, even though the reality was only half of their military had even been deployed to the Sinai. He tells everyone, we're ready at full strength to attack. In fact, we've got Israel beat 3-1 in tanks, in troops, in artillery, and we're going to attack in 2 days. Al-Fajr is in 2 days. That would have been May the 27th. Abu Iban was sent to Paris, London, and the U.S. to get Marshall support. Everywhere he went, they said, do not attack, do not attack, do not attack. That's not what the Israelis wanted to hear. Dean Rusk, who had been the U.S. representative in the UN when Israel was established, was now president of the Rockefeller Foundation. And here was his observation from his experiences. Anyone who works for peace in the Middle East inevitably gets clobbered from both sides. On the eve of dawn, Nasser changes his mind, calls his commanders and chiefs together and says, do not attack. And the hawk, the chief of staff, says, I'll think about it. Well, by the next morning, he did think about it. The pilots were already in their planes. Egyptian pilots were already in their planes to execute dawn. And he said, cancel the plan. To which one of the commanders in the field said, why? Don't we trust that Allah will aid us? But that move right there set them up actually for their defeat. That's what's going on in Egypt at this time. Now, these are nations against nation. And notice in Egypt, they're against Israel, but they're also having their own problems within. Go to Israel. They're against all their neighbors and having problems from within. The National Religious Party is threatening to pull out of the Knesset, which would fold the government if Israel struck first. So now there's this huge debate going on in Israel. Even within the cabinet, the vote is 9-9, whether to strike first or not, or what to do with the blockade. 2 weeks before what ultimately became the beginning of the Six-Day War, Moshe Dayan was made commander of the military, and within 2 weeks, actually a month before, and within 2 weeks, he took over all the cabinet and swayed, because he was a hawk, and swayed everything in the direction of attacking. But the U.S. president, through the embassy in Tel Aviv, sent a personal message to the Prime Minister of Israel and to the cabinet. This word, fire first shot and you are on your own. It was as clear as it could be. The U.S. will not back you up if you fire the first shot. So Amit, who was the director of the Mossad, Israeli security, was sent to Washington, D.C. on May the 31st. Now we're within days of this war starting. And he got the same message from McNamara at the CIA saying, and they had calls to Lyndon Johnson from the Pentagon saying, no, do not strike first. June 5th, 7:10 in the morning, day one of the war. Several squadrons of planes take off from the area near Hazor, and they go along the Jordan Valley, and they're able to get under the detection of the Jordanians. And then when the Jordanians did see bleeps on the screen, they sent word to Egypt, but the Egyptians the day before had changed their codes. So Egypt didn't get the messages, and they attacked the base of Egypt that was the furthest away from Israel, thinking Israel couldn't reach that base. So they attacked that base and all other air bases within Egypt, starting at 7:10, June the 5th. Within 45 minutes, Egypt lost 204 planes, 50% of their air force, all but 9 were on the ground. Day 2, the Israelis advance. The Egyptians start their fleeing back to Egypt, and hundreds were killed. Tanks were destroyed. It was an absolute disaster. That's the Egypt side. Jordan. King Hussein was trapped between Syria, that had always been an enemy, tried to assassinate him multiple times. They were now also declaring war on Israel. He had to decide between Egypt and Syria. He went with Egypt, even though all of his trusted advisors said, don't do it. There's a theme here. Trusted advisors said, don't do it. So when the Gulf of Hormuz was blocked, the Jordanians sent hundreds of tanks and military into the West Bank. They militarized the West Bank, which was kind of against the agreement after the 47 war. When this started happening, the American embassy in Jordan told all tourists to stay out of the West Bank and Jerusalem. 2 weeks later, they told anyone who is unnecessary personnel that are U.S. citizens to leave the West Bank and Jerusalem. We were living just near Mount Scopus at the time, and Dad thought he was not unnecessary personnel. But then on May the 31st, the day that Amit, after the fact we didn't know it, but the day that Amit went to D.C. to talk to McNamara is when the U.S. Embassy said, as an American citizen, you are required to leave. If you do, we can revoke your citizenship or your passport. they insisted that every American get out of there within 24 hours. Sold our car, went to Amman, and flew to Beirut on the 31st. And that 2 weeks was etched in my memory almost daily. We had blackouts every night. We had to totally cover all of our windows. We had to paint the headlights on our car with just blue. And I remember we had a little strip so you could kind of see where you're going, but you couldn't see much. And this is long before cell phones. So we thought, what happens if war breaks out and we're in Ramallah at school and Mother and Dad are in Jerusalem or something? How would we ever connect again? I mean, every day you were thinking, what could happen? So and looking around, I think I'm the only one in this room has been close to war. Now, Venezuela may be at some point, but those are feelings of, they're frightening. They really are frightening. And I can imagine how those disciples felt, even in Jerusalem, under the threat of war anytime from Rome. They had it all the time. They knew what the Romans would do to people they conquered. And I can empathize with that. And as we left Jerusalem, it was eerie. All shops were closed. The shutters were down. It was like it was a ghost town when we left that last May the 31st. Went down the Jordan Valley, and I have never seen so many army tanks in my life. Everywhere there was these, if you've been to the Jordan Valley, you know there's these kind of leftovers from where the Dead Sea could have been. And on every one of these mountains, you see an army tank pointing toward Israel, all the way, from the very top all the way down. It was just totally militarized. Day 2 of the war for Jordan was not like day 2 of Egypt. The heaviest fighting was in Jerusalem. And the Israelis almost did not get Jerusalem. The Jordanians were the toughest fighters of all that they dealt with. They were prepared. They did street fighting. I mean, this was a tough. They've got some real heroes of them winning over Jerusalem at that time. That's where the toughest part of the war took place. Being a town I was in for 4 years, I think of the blood that would run down the streets and the people that died. All because of wars and rumors of war. It was a sad time. Day 3, 6,000 Americans are now in Beirut. We were given 24 hours to get to the compound of the American University of Beirut. And that night, they started putting us in groups and in convoys early dawn. We were taking different routes to the airport in Beirut, and there wasn't a plane on the tarmac. And I'm thinking, what's happening? But within hours, planes came in, one after the other. They loaded them up and took them wherever. They happened to take us to Athens. All of that was the results of wars and rumors of wars. The sad part of it for me is, while it's a peaceable kingdom, it can lose at times. There's battles we lose. Mother and Dad did 7 years of mission work in Jerusalem, and that war ended the church among the Arabs in Jerusalem because Christian Arabs fled and never came back, and the Christian population just nosedived in Jerusalem. And today, every time I go back every year to see more and more of the old city taken over by fanatical Jews, taking Arab houses and areas, it's painful for me to see that. And this has been going on since 1967. It's just a war of attrition as they're slowly getting more and more. All it does is create more hate and violence. So go back and look at, he says, let no one lead you astray at those times. Nobody could trust any of the radio broadcasts from any of the nations. Everybody only listened to BBC. Because day 1 of the war, when it was already over before it started, the Egyptian broadcast, we have now attacked every town in Israel, and Israel will be in the sea by tomorrow. Even Nasser believed it. His own men wouldn't tell him the truth till 8 o'clock that night, that he had lost half of his planes and all of this. So he goes to the command post, and they're drunk and having troubles trying to deal with the reality of what has just happened. We make good friends of archaeologists at Beit Shemesh, and it was amazing to hear their story because they were young adults at that time, and they were actually digging trenches in all of the public parks in Tel Aviv and other areas, knowing that they were attacked. There's going to be a lot of deaths, so they already dug trenches to have mass burials in. That's his memory of that side of it. And then the Jordanian side and the people that lost. And there were refugees on the West Bank that were now pushed a second time. They were already refugees from 48, now became refugees in 67. And there's still a refugee camp in Bethlehem, outside Bethlehem, to this very day. Families who've been refugees for 3 generations now. Wars are terrible. Wars are terrible. The only hope Jesus gave, because you're going to have wars and rumors of wars, nations against nations. But the gospel must first be preached to the nations. So each day this week, I'd like our prayer to be, we're going to sing our prayer, Peace, Perfect Peace. Listen to the words from a backdrop of someone who's been pretty close to war.